So does anyone else remember the 2011 video game Homefront, which depicted a Korean invasion of the United States? Yeah, it was an interesting story to say the least, and one that's very weird to look back on because this week, according to that story, the United States will be invaded by the Greater Korean Republic. So I figured today, since it's kind of science fiction and it's relevant to the date, we could take a look back at sort of the background behind that story and how we got from the world in 2011 to what Homefront thought the world of 2025 would look like. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So before we begin, I know all of this is very silly. A lot of it is very out there. And I obviously encourage you to make fun of it in the comments because it's kind of ridiculous. But try to keep them civil because we are talking about real world places and events and real countries and real nationalities. So let's keep things as civil as possible. But let's just jump right in with where all this begins. So when you first start the game, it plays a maybe 3-4 minute video that's a timeline of events leading up to the events of the game, depicting how the United States fell and how North Korea rose to power. And so we're going to start with the first event on that timeline, which is the death of Kim Jong-il, who died in January of 2012, January 9th, to be replaced by his son, Kim Jong-un. And this is where the game takes a sharp, 90-degree right turn from reality, because Kim Jong-un ends up being a very open leader who values international cooperation for North Korea and basically opens the country up almost immediately. This quickly starts building international trust, both between the international community and North Korea, and in between the two Koreas themselves. In October that same year, October 2012, the United States announces its withdrawal from Iraq and Afghanistan, ending the US's military conflicts in the Middle East, which were going on at that time. At some point in 2012, it's also hinted that Kim Jong-un brokered a peace treaty between North and South Korea, officially and formally ending the Korean War, an act that gained him a Nobel Peace Prize in early 2013. In 2013, economic troubles began in Southeast Asia, most notably in South Korea and in China. These economic troubles in South Korea ultimately lead to an anti-American sentiment within the country that is stoked by an increasingly pro-unification government that favors unification under a more northern system. By August 2013, the United States military has announced it will be withdrawing from the Korean Peninsula, seeing that there's not much of a military purpose there now that the Korean War is formally over and the South Koreans are basically asking them to leave. Furthermore, there's growing trouble at home for the Americans as the economic troubles in Southeast Asia quickly spread to the rest of the world, and the United States is starting to fall into another recession. I'm not going to get into the weirdly complex economic descriptions the game presents, but we'll just kind of take it at face value there that the economy in the United States has started to take a downturn, and things are getting worse in the Middle East. And by that, I mean there's a growing tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran over the fate of Iraq, which now is spiraling into chaos with the withdrawal of American and British forces. And on November 17th, 2013, the two Koreas are formally reunified, forming the Greater Korean Republic, or GKR. Through the process of reunification, which occurred throughout the end of 2013 and the beginning of 2014, Kim Jong-un was seen to be reversing many of his father's policies, including opening up many of the labor camps and releasing people back to their families who had been held in government captivity. This ended up brewing a lot of goodwill among the people, who ultimately saw him as the man who brokered the Korean reunification deal. In May of 2014, talks between the United States and Japan broke down about the future of the U.S. military base in Okinawa, which ended up resulting in Americans planning to withdraw their troops from Japan altogether. By 2015, growing strife in the Middle East has driven gas prices up dramatically, with the price at the pump now close to $20. Meanwhile, in the Greater Korean Republic, Kim Jong-un is officially elected their first president. As the global economy continues to spiral and fearing a drop in oil prices and a lack of available oil supply, and this sounds crazy now, but a trade deal is signed between Russia and Ukraine to basically withhold their oil and natural gas reserves and only share with each other. As U.S. forces began to withdraw from Japan and really most of Southeast Asia in early 2016, they began a massive downsizing effort to cut back the cost of the U.S. military. This downsizing includes retiring several Nimitz-class aircraft carriers as the U.S. Navy has begun to lose sight of the value of large capital ships. By June of 2016, a coalition consisting of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, Egypt, and Turkey carry out a peacekeeping operation in Iraq with the intention of restabilizing that country. Claiming it's a blatant Saudi intervention in a neutral country's internal affairs, Iran launches a counter-invasion, starting what would become known as the Oil War in between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which would devastate Middle Eastern oil fields and cause gas prices to further increase across the world. Meanwhile, the United States continues to fall further and further into isolation and economic ruin, deciding to end their open border policies with both of their neighbors, Canada and Mexico. By the end of 2016, the cost of gas has gotten so high in the United States that many states end up fuel rationing, and that winter was known as being particularly harsh, especially because a lot of homes were unable to afford heat with the growing cost of natural gas and oil. 2017 saw an increasing downward spiral by the United States, while tensions started to brew in Japan. An attempted assassination against Japanese royalty, supposedly carried out by Korean nationals, leads to anti-Korean sentiment. This is used by the Greater Korean Republic to justify increased hostilities towards Japan, which is now left without their American allies. By the end of the year in the United States, martial law is being declared in certain areas as fuel riots begin, people rioting against the availability of not just fuel, but the goods that would be transported by the trucks that need that fuel. 2018 is a pretty big year in this timeline because at the start of April 2018, the Greater Korean Republic launches an invasion of Japan. An invasion that's very unique because their initial target is a nuclear power plant in southern Japan, one that's quickly destroyed by Korean special forces, scattering radiation across southern Japan and basically forcing Japan to fairly quickly surrender to the Korean invasion, putting Japan firmly under the control of the GKR. We know at some point between 2019 and the start of the war with the United States, about 5 years later, the Greater Korean Republic ended up absorbing a lot of nations in the South Pacific, and some of these likely started around this time, although we do have specific dates for a few of them later, so I'll talk about that a little bit further on. 2020 began with the Canadians closing the border with the United States, citing the growing unrest within America. Meanwhile, in Southeast Asia, the Greater Korean Republic becomes the world's leading manufacturer of military goods, something that is not lost on many neutral countries, which are starting to buy their military equipment from Korea. Furthermore, Korean forces are now participating in peacekeeping operations in the Middle East, most notably to try to end that ongoing war in Iraq. By the start of 2021, the first cases of avian flu have started in the United States, and a major pandemic is starting to spread across the country. By the end of the year, the Mexicans would have also closed their border with the United States, basically sectioning off the United States entirely from two of their land-based neighbors and quarantining the entire country as the spiraling economic conditions and rampant plague started to really take a toll on the structural integrity of the United States government. In April 2021, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia all vote to willingly join the Greater Korean Republic in a growing Southeast Asian sort of superstate. We know that at some point around this time, the Philippines and Indonesia also opted to join this growing nation. 2022 and 2023 saw more of the same, this ongoing spiral of the United States and this growing presence of the Greater Korean Republic on the international stage, both militarily and economically, with an intense conscription program, rendering the KPA, the Korean military, the largest standing military on Earth, fielding 25 million soldiers. The only event noted in the timeline for 2024 is the beginning of the launch of a Korean counterpart to the American GPS system, which is been left in disarray due to the chaos in the United States. But it's interesting to note that this GPS system being launched by the Greater Korean Republic actually contains a nuclear weapon for use as an EMP weapon in a planned invasion of the United States. That invasion began on January 16th, 2025, later this week, when the GKR detonated an EMP in orbit above the United States, knocking out all of the electronics across the continental United States ahead of an invasion which would first see Hawaii seized on the 18th and the 19th, and an invasion of the mainland beginning on the 21st of January. Now, Interestingly, this timeline kind of yada yadas the rest of the invasion of the United States, basically just saying by a year later they had taken everything west of the Mississippi and managed to secure that border by basically irradiating the whole Mississippi River. All things considered, it's insane to look back on now and see this crazy timeline that is so far from reality, but it's kind of fascinating to think that when this game was made in 2011, this was viewed as this far future event, and now we're there at that point in history, and it's totally different. I'm not shaming the creators, by the way, for predicting wrong. Obviously, they needed a way to write a game where North Korea invaded the United States, and honestly, I think this is the best you could do for that scenario. It's definitely better than some other pieces of fiction written around that time trying to depict a similar scenario. Now, I know it's a bit of a tight segue, but it's the best I got. If you'd like to learn more about wars between the United States and communist powers in Southeast Asia, I'll leave a link up here to my video on the Sino-American War from Fallout, breaking down step by step how that conflict played out between the United States and the People's Republic of China prior to their nuclear exchange. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments what you think of this scenario. Do you think it was reasonable to believe any of this at the time in 2011, or do you think it's completely out there, even for the time that it was written, which obviously was before Kim Jong-un even came to power? If you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in science fiction, you can leave that down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.